Vermont is known as the Green Mountain State, but the mountains are not the only green aspect of Vermont. Since the closing of Vermont Yankee, Vermont leads the country in terms of renewable energy generation by percentage. While renewable energy is commonplace, there is still a large group of people who oppose renewables, or at least oppose the way they are currently being developed. Before we can describe the current state of renewables in Vermont, it is important to understand the way electricity travels from the producers to the consumers. When electricity is generated by a producer, it is usually sent to what is known as the grid. The electrical grid is the circuit that allows energy to flow from the producers to the consumers through power lines. We talked to Dave Dunn, the Renewable Energy Customer Service Representative for GMP, about what GMP and other companies do with their renewable energy.
I think it's one of those things where energy is not something that flows from point A to point B. It will take every path available depending on the need. So as you generate electricity, it has to be used somewhere for it to flow. You can generate into an open wire and nothing's going to happen. So you have to have a generation source or a power supply as well as a power use.
When a producer generates a unit of renewable energy, the state of Vermont issues what is called the Renewable Energy Credit, or REC. These credits can be sold, so most energy producers in Vermont sell these valuable credits to other states and corporations who use them as a way to lower their carbon footprint without actually using renewable energies.
Presently, when you consider all of our renewable energy sources, either the older facilities like the old hydro facilities and our more recent solar facilities, and including rather large-scale renewable energy, Hydro-Quebec sends us renewable energy on a daily basis. The total project capacity is about 50% of our total load is renewable resources. In Vermont, the electrical component is governed by something called Section 248 of the utility law, the electric generation law. And in order to build a project, you have to satisfy the criteria of Section 248. And there is a fairly long and detailed list that will focus on just that.
There's two aspects to stormwater systems. There's the construction phase and then there's the operational phase. The construction phase, you do a lot more to make sure you don't get sediment into the water. That's where silt fencing comes in. You actually have what's called an EPSC plan. It's a sedimentation control, environmental protection sedimentation control, which just lays out, and you have an EPC coordinator whose only job it is during those projects do nothing but watch that all those measures are in place, whether they're silt fence, hay bales, whatever, and that you're constantly monitoring what's going on during the construction phase.
While systems are in place to attempt to keep the environmental impact of renewable energy low, there are those who believe the state and developers are not doing enough. Some of the issues include inadequate screening, poor locations, and outdated state policies. Vermonters for a Clean Environment is one organization that speaks out about these pressing issues. We visited Annette Smith, founder of Vermonters for a Clean Environment, to discuss issues associated with renewable energy.
Well, the one thing is the policies that our legislators and our governor have put in place. If there was one thing I could change, I would turn this whole thing upside down and do it a completely different way. It's probably not the answer you expected, because it's not, I'm talking about screening, I'm not talking about one particular issue, I'm not talking about the Public Service Board. No, we have put in place policies that are truly insane for our state, for a state that has valued its resources, that has a high value aesthetics, high value natural resources, high value, so much we have here that we have not placed any economic value on in terms of what we're losing.
Activists are not the only ones who see shortcomings with current renewable energy. We talked to David Dunn to see what issues are like from the developer's perspective.
Initial cost, the capital investment elsewhere in the country is probably more of a challenge since we have policies here that provide a reasonable return on investment. And sort of the general mindset of a percentage of the population saying, I just want my power to be as cheap as possible, I don't care where it comes from. I think there's a percentage of Vermonters that feel that way. But from what we've heard from the majority of our customers, and our legislature also seems to be driving towards that, we want to build more renewable generation.
We've had a lot of support for building generation, for renewable generation. I think siting, and it's something that's come up recently. I think the legislature enacted a siting commission who's coming out with a report. But it's certainly been, it's been a question, making sure the local community has the appropriate amount of involvement when the discussion is going on.
Developers who come into a community who have no connection to the community, who come in and say, we're doing this and we don't care what you think, if we get our permits, we're doing it. Doesn't matter whether it's renewable energy or not. That's a very standard practice that I've had to deal with.
Although communication between the developer and the community can cause problems, GMP strive to connect with the Lowell's community to reach an agreement regarding the Ridgeline Wind project.
And then our most recent investment in renewable energy is the Lowell Mountain Wind Facility. We call it Kingdom Community Wind, and that is 21 3-megawatt turbines, so it's 63 megawatts worth of energy generation that sits on the ridgeline of Lowell, Vermont.
First time, what we said early on was like, look, if the town of Lowell doesn't want the project, we're done. I mean, it's important that at least the host town had a say. We had a vote, which wasn't a requirement under 248, but it was just like, it's our way to gauge, and we had a 70% positive vote.
To find out more about commercial solar in relationship to the people it directly affects, we talked to John Childs, who leased part of his land to a commercial solar development in Orwell, Vermont.
Well, at first our neighbors were really upset. They were a little bit disorganized when they sent out the letters informing the neighbors that this might be happening. Right after they got their certificate for public good, when they were applying for it, they sent out letters to give the community a chance to respond. And in the letters, they placed the location real near the street, right in front of the neighbors to my east house, and right in the view of the neighbors directly across the street and up the street. So everybody was pretty upset about that, and I totally understand that. It would have been right in their front yard, basically.
John Child's situation is not unique. Often developers must work with the community to come up with a plan that is beneficial for all parties.
We don't have any say or kind of ability to get in the minds of the folks that do develop these projects. There's no question. I mean, I think there's some where the siting is not as optimal as others. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the developers that build some of the projects. I would, hope that more and more folks start to put focus on where they get built, as much as the size and everything there.
So as you're going through that process, you want to select a property that will be able to handle a generation source of that size and type. So there's a study process that a developer needs to go through with the utility to make sure the grid is compatible with that generation source. And as you choose the piece of property, you then have to do a lot of preliminary engineering and design on how is this facility going to be laid out? Where do the different components of your generation source get placed? How do you bring power into the facility? How do you deal with the construction process and vehicles to reduce erosion? If you're particularly close to a stream or a brook, you have to be very careful. And also thinking about what's the impact of that facility.
Well, the first thing is to choose a site that doesn't need to have trees planted. So for instance, my meadow on the other side of the driveway, beautiful site for a solar array. So bad soil, there's already a tree line screen, nobody would look at it. It's not hard to find sites like this. There's gravel pits, there's things that are, off the beaten track.
If it's a GMP project, I mean, it is all, for us, it's all about, it's cliche, but it's grassroots. So we're building a digester, a farm project up in St. Albans. And there were concerns, making sure truck traffic is understood. Understanding the full greenhouse gas plan, and it just takes a lot of communication, a lot of hours, and just meeting with folks that have concerns. I mean, I personally went to a number of town public meetings, answer questions, make sure that you've provided all the facts you can. In some cases where somebody's asking for some flexibility on, making sure If you damage the road, you're going to repair it, things like that. You bake those into the plan as conditions.
Most people in Vermont would say the future of energy lies in renewables. While much of the renewable industry is mostly ineffective in replacing fossil fuels as energy producers at the moment, the progress that has been made shows the future is seemingly bright for renewables. With continued support and advancements in technology and policies, renewables can be the future of energy. All of the people we have talked to, while they might generally have different views, agree that increased dependence on renewables is the best route for the future and the planet.